We have also seen that there is a preferences on communities to rely on informal dispute mechanisms because they are culturally compatible, affordable, and accessible for most disputants. Actors including family heads, quota chiefs, town chiefs, sectional and zonal chiefs, clan chiefs, and the top of this hierarchy, the paramount chiefs. Disputants are expected to follow the hierarchy of these systems to resolve their conflicts from one level to another. The process followed is a mixture of negotiation and adjudication. And you'll find that efforts are made to address the root causes, and consensus are given on how are brought about on these reconciliations. However, they also face a lot of problems. These informal settlement mechanisms. I'll just mention some of them. The structure of traditional justice have been weakened by significant changes in local administration and institutional framework in most of the African countries. The introduction of decentralization and the emergence of new type of stakeholders have weakened the customary systems. We have also seen that some of the cultural paradigms on which the informal justice mechanisms are based are incompatible with laws and international standards. Some chiefs have been accused of requesting high fees and sometimes gifts. The decisions taken by customary actors in charge of resolving disputes are unpredictable and most of the time inconsistent. Disputants sometimes disagree on the right authority for their cases and often move from one authority to the next, looking for the one who would give resolutions that would favor them. We have also seen that young people and women tend to be dissatisfied with the informal justice systems as they feel that their gender or age are used against them. So due to these limitations of both formal and informal justice systems, and also the potential of unsatisfactory settlements, which have potential to escalate violence, several African countries have, have experimented alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. These are processes which are adopted or used to resolve or facilitate the resolutions of disputes outside of courts and customary adjudication structures. We have also seen that, or we have also learned from our regional member countries that, especially the communities where we work in, that these are the systems which are adopted or they are used to resolve or facilitate the resolution of disputes in an acceptable way within the communities. And there are also informal practices and norms that aim at assisting disputants to reach consensual and implementable agreements to preserve the public interest, local solidarity, social cohesion, and disputants' honor. They normally use simple and clear procedures to resolve disputes at less cost and more efficiently than the courts or sometimes the informal customary systems. However, despite these adoptions, several countries are still having a lot of challenges, and that these challenges need to be looked at and more widely resolved within the countries and the regions as well. They include the fact that many governments are yet to recognize the need for they need to use the alternative dispute resolutions. They provide inadequate support, inadequate human resource, sometimes they lack legal foundation and financing of ADR programs, which in many countries depend on donor funding or donor support. This constrains efforts to build relevant institutions and train those who are involved in ADRs. We have also seen that lawyers who have not been properly exposed to ADR view it as a competitor against litigation and therefore a threat to their profession. ADR practitioners are seen as volunteers who who do not have to be properly trained nor remunerated for their services. So these are just some of the challenges which we have seen. So it is against this background that the African Development Bank embarked on the process of developing a toolkit on alternative dispute resolution in Africa. This is a work in progress, and it's focusing on mediation, which is an effective way of resolving disputes in a very early stage without need for courts interventions. This is an ideal way for parties to take control of their disputes and reach a decision which which benefits both parties and come to a suitable and satisfactory agreement. We at the African Development Bank thank the organizers of this conference for giving us this opportunity to discuss the content of the ADR toolkit with you practitioners and all who are involved in the ADR areas as well as land sector in a whole, so that you can contribute to the bank's efforts in trying to assist our regional member countries to with an effective way of resolving these settlements, so that we can come up with an ideal toolkit which bridges the gap between the formal legal systems and the traditional models, so that at least we can pave way for banks' investments that are undertaken only on secured land and the land which do not have any dispute. So we also looking forward to receive your contributions. And once again, thank you so much for being here with us. Over to you, our moderator.
Thank you, Maria, for making that very clear, as you have heard, especially those who work in government. The bank does not give any more loans to land which is not secure, yeah? And so it means that we have to put our houses in order, and courts have not been that solution, or they are a bit of a solution. Those who were in the CGS session yesterday, you might recall that Judge Deo said clearly that without ADR, it is impossible for the courts to handle land disputes. There are just too many. And so there is need to really strengthen this element in countries, and it should be taken up as a regional approach. So very much what the bank is doing is also the thinking in countries, and we saw from Kenya that they've really tried to take this up formally. But allow me to invite our next speaker, Mr. Francis Gimara. Mr. Francis Gimara and I go a very long way, but we won't say where. Today we discovered that we're also in the same block of halls, which were the naughty ones at Makerere University. But Francis has done his running battles in the legal profession. And today, Francis, you're going to answer for us one simple question for you. What are the key measures needed to promote an effective dispute resolution system? Welcome, Francis. You can speak from your seat, or you could come here, whichever is convenient.
Thank you for granting me permission to speak from here. Good morning, delegates. It's my pleasure to be invited to join this panel on a topic that I am so passionate about, ADR. And I have been asked to answer one question, and I will answer one question that has been asked. Namely, what are the key measures needed to promote an effective dispute settlement system? Of course, in answering that question, I'll be very alive that we are discussing land, and looking at what the speaker from the bank has shared with us this morning and the toolkit. I want to first start by commending ADB for coming up with that toolkit. It's a great place to put thoughts together on ADR around land issues. And when we talk about ADR, we are basically trying to interrogate, the formal system versus the informal system, and trying to find out which one can solve these matters. Of course, the toolkit begins by identifying the challenges that have come up or as a result of using both the formal and informal, and it proposes mediation as the key ADR mechanism to be used for resolution of land disputes. I think that it's a good place to start, but I think we need to improve on that. I will say that mediation per se may not be the only one. We need to look at ADR broadly and find out also the other mechanisms that can be used. And I say this because I am challenged by mediation over customary tenure matters, especially. How do you disaggregate that from the institution? Because much of customary tenure is located within the traditional institutions. And I want to say that traditional institutions have never really been empowered, properly to do that job of ADR, whether mediation, whether resolving land conciliation matters. And I give the example of the Uganda Land Act. When you look at it, it starts from a recognition that customary tenure is one of the 4 tenures, but very ineffectively provides for the traditional institutions. And in fact, just from the process of obtaining the titles, it gives them more of a secondary role as opposed to a primary role. Then when you read further ahead and about Section 88, they then give them the role to mediate conflicts. But the law does not create a supportive infrastructure. So one thing that we need to do to ensure that ADR is effective is to begin by putting into place a clear legal and policy framework that promotes ADR. When you look at the entire legal system as far as land is, the laws are ineffective. And I've just given that example. You have customary tenure, and then you haphazardly provide for traditional institutions, and then you expect them that they will actually, do mediation and other ADR things related to land. So that's why I find a little bit of the toolkit to go back and look at, before it blames traditional institutions, to ask, since the Bazungu left here, have we really left this English law we inherited to build up our systems, to empower them so that they are able to resolve issues? Because now we are blaming them, but even the corruption there is because we have not created a legal framework that demands that they resolve disputes in an accountable manner. So until we do that, we will not be able to, harness their potential. So we need to create, one, a robust legal and regulatory framework that is able to harness the potential of the institutions that can deliver ADR in Africa. And that is not only traditional institutions. You have to involve religious leaders. You have to involve, all civil society. Whoever can demonstrate some capacity and respect in community to help deal with ADR issues on land must be located, facilitated, and empowered to do that job. So that is very, very important as one of the things that need to be done. Then the second issue, while we are talking about that effective legal and policy framework, we should also be concerned. Esther, I have 10 minutes? Yes, you already have. Okay, thank you. The drivers of that effective legal and policy framework should also look at how the outcome of those dispute settlement platforms can be integrated with the formal justice system. I read somewhere in the report that Ghana has done that very well, and I think that is a model that we need to look at. I think it works because in my other work as a member of the Case Backlog Monitoring Committee of the Judiciary of Uganda, we have actually come to a realization that the formal justice system will never have been in that committee for the last 4 years. We have been always dealing with how do we address backlog, but it's always increasing, especially land disputes. So we have come to the conclusion that it will never resolve land disputes until we go back to embrace other mechanisms, such as ADR. So we need to have then a legal system that in a major way connects with these informal, justice systems to ensure that there is either through execution or either through appeals, whatever it is, there must be a connection so that that ADR then commands some kind of recognition and compliance from the formal justice system. Then the other issue also that legal and regulatory reform must also entail the promotion of legal pluralism as an enabler of ADR. I still think that much of the customary law, it's not that bad. I've seen a lot of emphasis on it being discriminatory against women. Okay, all these are challenges, but there's also most of it is actually good in resolving conflicts because people believe in it. The elders or the people who resolve these conflicts, if they are given mediation skills, if they are given empowered enough, it is easier for them to get these issues resolved because most of them, I've seen these disputants, grow in the community. They have observed them, they know them with the back of their hands. So we need to ensure that there is some form of codification of the customary law to enable ADR to be more effective. Then, of course, I have mentioned, and I'll repeat again, for there to be an effective thing, governments must ensure that there are ADR facilities, wherever it is. Whether in Uganda you integrate it within the parish development model, it is important that communities, wherever they are helped to have platforms, infrastructure for them to go and talk about their conflict issues. They are helped to locate those with the skills, to mediate and resolve conflict. So just under that, with that, I think then we can have that. Then the second and last point, as I wind up, for us to have an effective ADR system, we need to speak about mindset change. Mindset change is very, very important. From our education, because we lawyers are the drivers of disputes to court, Why? Because we are educated in the adversarial litigation mode. And it is very difficult for lawyers to unpack from that mode. At ICAMEC, we noticed that after many years, the lawyers had not even embraced. We didn't even have, you can imagine, until we set up the International Center for Arbitration and Mediation in Kampala, we did not have more than 10 members of SIAB. That shows you the kind of mindset we had. Until we set this center, now we have reached about 40 through training, and we are beginning to see that the crop of mediators and arbitrators and conciliators is growing. So mindset change, right from the education, we need to change, the law school syllabus. Put ADR there as a major course. Then lastly, of course, with that also mindset training across, for people to understand that one, through ADR, they can have their disputes resolved. That the formal justice system is not superior to that. As long as they get justice, that works for them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francis, for emphasizing the importance and the significance of ADR. It's the way to go. Actually, it's the way to go. But allow me to invite Honorable Justice Oscar Ngote. He heads or is the principal judge in the Environment and Land Court in Kenya. For us in the IGAD region, this is a best practice we have so far. And he's going to speak to us about what can be done to bridge the gap between the formal, legal, and informal systems. Justice Ngote.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I'll be very brief. Thank you. I'll be very brief because judges, we are not to talk a lot. I'll be giving the practical things that Kenya has undertaken to actually bridge this gap between the formal legal system and the traditional modes. And these systems that we've put in place are actually working. So for me, it's not whether we've done it, it is what we've done and how the other member states can actually emulate what we are doing in Kenya. Now, first of all, we need to recognize that the traditional justice systems, the tenure itself is recognized not just by most of the member states, but even internationally. If you look at the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, comment number 32 of 2007, the committee recognized that indeed courts should be able to employ their traditional customs to resolve conflicts. Of course, with the two riders, that while doing so, there must be fair hearing, must have fair hearing. All parties should be given a fair hearings. And secondly, and which is more important, is that those resolutions by the traditional leaders or by the communities must be adopted by the courts. So we need to start from that perspective, that it's not an African thing. It's a recognized concept by the international community. All we need is to make sure that we abide by those two principles. Now, the Dakar Declaration on the Right to a Fair Trial also actually recognizes that particular concept, and it also emphasizes that when we are dealing with the traditional courts, all we need to adhere to as member states is the issue of fair trial. Now, coming back to Kenya, we are lucky because the traditional justice system is actually recognized in the Constitution itself, under Article 159. And it uses that word, traditional justice system, should be used by the court as an ADR mechanism. So we already have a constitutional basis for us to put in place mechanisms of involving the communities in resolving disputes. And that particular provision only gives the rider that while the traditional justice system is being used or implemented, it should not be repugnant to justice and morality, and also it should not go against the Bill of Rights. So that you are having a system which is recognized by the Constitution with those imperatives, so that we are not going against the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution itself also recognizes the customary law as a source of law, so that it is one of the sources of law in Kenya, meaning that communities can actually implement or use customary laws of their clans or their tribes to resolve disputes. Of course, with that rider that it should not go against written law, or neither should it be repugnant to justice and morality. So those are the imperatives that we have in Kenya, which have given us the basis of rolling out this particular system of resolving conflicts. And the bottom line, when we are doing all this, is that we are talking about social justice, whereby the question of equality in the society has to be observed by these communities as they resolve the disputes. Now, the most important aspect of customary law and dispute resolution mechanism, which has been upheld by the Constitutional Court of South Africa, I will not quote that case, is that when we are dealing with this particular concept, we should be looking at the concept as a living customary law. so that customs have to change with times. It doesn't mean that what our forefathers' position was in the 50s, 40s, and 30s is what should apply as at now. So the concept that needs to be applied is the living customary law, so that generations they keep on coming up with what we call the living customary law. You apply the customary law as at that particular time. If that particular law or that custom is repugnant or is not in conformity with the laws of the country, then you cannot apply it, because you need to apply the living customary law. And that is the concept that we use all the time in Kenya. So what have we done to implement this particular constitutional provision in Kenya? We have a policy. It's called the Alternative Justice System Policy. Now, this policy creates a steering committee, a national steering committee, and I've seen one or two members in this building. There's a vice chair of the National Land Commission who is there. She's a member of that national steering committee. This committee oversees the implementation of this particular policy. And the policy has got 4 ways of resolving, or it shows 4 ways of resolving disputes at a community level. We have what we call the autonomous mechanism, where communities arrange themselves and resolve disputes at that particular level. The second model is state control, where we have local chiefs resolving disputes at the level of their governance structure. Then we have what we call organizational managed strategy, whereby we have NGOs and churches being allowed to actually handle disputes. And the fourth one is what we call the court annexed. The court annexed is where once a dispute is in court, we can refer that dispute, and we always do it. I mean, in most of the cases, we refer the dispute to the community to resolve it, then bring it back to court for adoption. So, and all these 4 systems, once a decision is made, it's brought back to the court and it's adopted as a judgment of the court. And this is documented because we have a policy guiding each and every process, and then we have the National Steering Committee, which actually comes up with several mechanisms of assisting these locally based communities to resolve those particular disputes. So that's how we have done it in Kenya, and it is working. Of course, the issue is, have we completely linked the traditional justice system with the formal system? My answer is yes. We've done it, and we are implementing it. We have, in the judiciary system, we have a registrar who is in charge of the court annexed mediation, and he has a registry whereby we record each and every matter that has been resolved outside the court system. And we document, we have statistics, and we encourage the judges in the court, because I'm in charge of the court that deals with land disputes in Kenya, where we have 53 judges. So we have trained our judges to be able to make sure that the community resolution mechanism is implemented as a decision of the court. And I think it is working, although, of course, the policy was only passed in 2020. So we are at the initial stages of implementing it, and it's working very well. So thank you very much.
I'm hoping that Uganda is all ears, because we've struggled with this since 19 what? Yeah. But there was a contradiction. I don't know whether that's a contradiction. Francis is going in for codification of customary law. Justice Angote is looking at the living customary law. I would like to hear how that will go in the discussions later on. I think that's very interesting, would be interesting to hear. But while they think about the answers of their contradictions, they're both legal brains. Let's hear from Mr. Michael Ochieng Odiambo. Mr. Ochieng Odiambo is my mentor, but also my friend. And if you hear him speak and you hear Shadrach speak, you wonder whether it's the same person. Those who know Shadrach will have heard him speak. Michael has been around land for the longest time I can remember. And I'm going to ask him to come. He's the best person to talk to us about best practices because he's lived it. He's a living library of that. So Michael, welcome. You're welcome.
I like to talk when I'm seeing everybody I'm talking to. It's also a power issue so that I'm above you. Because otherwise, if you're at the same level, it doesn't work very well. But anyway, thank you very much, Esther. The time is too short. I told Maria yesterday that 10 minutes is how long it takes me to introduce a subject. But let me see what I can do here. The title of my presentation conflates ADR, which is a mechanism, and mediation, which is an approach within ADR. So I'm also going to conflate the two in my intervention. But Esther and Shadrach also emphasized to me yesterday that they are interested in comments on the toolkit. So I'll start off by just a few remarks on the toolkit. I think I've read through the toolkit, and I would say that the toolkit is well crafted and it's adequate for the task. It is sufficiently detailed without being too long. So it's really a practitioner's toolkit. So it's really very useful in that regard. There are three substantive chapters I see. One that sets the context, another one that introduces land mediation, and the third one that sets out the steps of mediation, the methods of mediation. And then there are three annexes with a little more detail and a glossary of terms and a fairly comprehensive bibliography. One thing I noticed is that even though the toolkit is talking about using ADR in resolution of general disputes, there's too much emphasis to post-conflict realities. It's not, I guess that's because it's borrowing quite a lot from the experience of Liberia. But I think what we're talking about here is not just about post-conflict resolution of disputes, talking about generally integrating ADR into the mechanism for dispute resolution across the board. I'm also in the chapter on steps for mediation. At the end of each section, there is a reference to review questions. It's not clear to me what you mean by review questions. They sound more like key considerations, so maybe you may have to look at that. But back to ADR, I think what ADR does, and that's clear from the previous interventions, is that it responds to limitations of both the formal and informal justice system. But I really like the point Francis raised, because I was concerned that the toolkit presents customary institutions as a problem. I think this idea that customary institution is a problem is, there's a risk of throwing out the baby with the dirty water. I think there are certain things that are of concern, but I think we need to appreciate. I don't think it is fair to judge customary systems and customary law on the same plane as we judge the formal judicial system, because the formal judicial system has failed in spite of having everything behind it, while the customary system has failed because it has nothing behind it. In fact, we talk about, for instance, in my country, the Constitution recognizes customary law. The judge is here. The only reference to customary law in the Constitution says it should not be applied unless it is repugnant to justice. There's nothing positive about customary law in our Constitution. And that, for me, is the main problem. We talk about ADR, we talk about customary law, but I challenge any lawyers who are here to tell me which of them attended a class on customary law. How can we be practicing customary law? How can we intend to integrate customary law into the system when we don't learn customary law? Yeah, if we don't have customary law in the curriculum of legal training, then neither the bench nor the bar is prepared to actually implement customary law. And how can we then therefore judge customary law or articulate its failings at the same level that we articulate the failings of the formal judicial system? I think in thinking about ADR and land dispute resolution, there are 4 points that I think it's important to keep in mind. These are the 4 considerations that for me make ADR particularly relevant to this issue. One is the essence of land in African societies. The tool makes the point that land is not just an economic, it's not a factor of production in the normal capitalist sense. It's also a key ingredient of social identity. So it embodies social values, it embodies deep spiritual and cultural identities in our society. So you cannot deal with it the way you deal with a conflict over a motor vehicle or a conflict over, over any chattel as such. The second thing is the complexity or intricacy of land issues and land disputes. Because of that first point, land issues are not just disputes between two individuals or even between two families. They are disputes that draw in the entire community and the entire society. And the manner in which we govern land has significant implications for the way in which we deal with governance as a general issue. Thirdly, is the reality of legal pluralism. And although we say legal pluralism, our investments don't show that we recognize there is plurality in our legal systems. We talk about legal pluralism, but our investments are about a monotheistic system where you only deal with one facet of what we call legal pluralism. If we recognize legal pluralism, then our investments should also show that we recognize legal pluralism. We should invest in both or all the systems that we recognize. And then finally, is the limit of mainstream mechanisms to the task of resolving land disputes. Traditionally, when we said alternative dispute resolution, we meant alternative to the courts. But today, the courts are the ones in charge of alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, which to me signifies the courts are accepting that they have failed. Yeah, because this is alternative to you, but now you are the one pulling it in. So the court systems have failed, they're recognizing alternative. So, but this is an acknowledgement that the formal court systems are inappropriate to the task. So that is the case for alternative dispute. Now, about mediation, I think the beauty of mediation as an approach is that mediation facilitates a process where the disputants are the ones that are finding a solution to their problem. That is different from telling them the solution. Because of that process of enabling them to arrive at a solution, it means that you empower people to be able to look more critically at the issues that they're differing about and to go to the root of the problem, which is not possible with a system other than mediation. So that is, for me, what is so useful about mediation, given the context we have set about land disputes. So the parties are engaging each other directly on the issues in dispute. And the mediator is just facilitating that process, enabling them to get to the core of the issue, find a solution that both of them will be happy with and that will have lasting value. In terms of key principles, the toolkit sets out a number of key principles, and these are, they are taken from a whole series of sources. But I see 6 key principles for me, and some of them are, conflating others. One, respect for the rights and obligations of all parties. And this respect for the rights and obligations is an empowerment issue. It empowers the disputants. It doesn't, if you go into into a court system, I practiced law for nearly a decade. When you are in court, I always use this example. I would be in court arguing a case, and I come out of the court, and even the parties I'm representing are congratulating me for a job well done. And I'm coming out that court feeling very uncomfortable. It's because they don't understand what is happening in there. Sometimes they're congratulating you because you're speaking very good English. Yeah. And that's how disempowering the court system is. The parties to the dispute don't know what is going on. They're depending on their lawyer to tell them what is going on. And if the lawyer speaks very articulately, they're very happy they're winning, and they get very disappointed when they actually lose, in spite of the articulate way in which their case was put. So the second thing is integrity, impartiality, neutrality, and professionalism of those who are in charge of the process. So when we talk about principles, we're talking about principles that apply to the process, principles that apply to the parties, and principles that apply to the mediators. So for mediators, the need for this, for being professional, for having integrity, for being impartial, and for being neutral is key to the mediation process. The third thing is proximity, accessibility, and reconciliation. Proximity means doing it at the level where the problem is. doing it at the location where the problem is, so that you're able to engage the local people, not calling them to Kampala, but going to Mubende and dealing with them on site. The third thing, the fourth one is being sensitive and respecting diversity, dignity, and non-discrimination. Now, this is very difficult to deal with, because sometimes we think when we talk about non-discrimination, we become very insensitive to cultures that run counter to what we push for in non-discrimination. That's the problem traditional customary law has to do with gender. Because sometimes some cultures are very anti-gender in the way in which we are articulating it in international law and our constitutions. Now, that is something we need to fight, but we need to fight it in a sensitive manner. That sensitivity is a very key element in mediation. You have to be sensitive to understand where these people are coming from, and then use your knowledge to be able to move them from where they are to the next level. But don't come to pontificate to them because you think what they're doing is ridiculous. Because nothing is ever ridiculous. It takes time for everything to change to a point where we can find it acceptable. Fifth is voluntary participation and ownership by key stakeholders. Now, that goes beyond the parties. Key stakeholders in a land dispute goes beyond the immediate parties to the dispute to include the whole community and the whole society. And then finally, sustainability of mediation outcomes, making sure that whatever outcomes we come up with are ones that will be workable and will be sustainable. Just 5 good practice. I don't say best practice. I don't believe there's such a thing as best practice. We are always evolving. So in terms of good practice, some of them have already been referred to here. I think the first one is the need for constitutional recognition of alternative dispute resolution. That's what makes the Kenyan case so important, because it is drawn from the Constitution. But that recognition should also extend to customary justice systems, so that we are able to borrow what is good in those customary systems, constitutionalize them, and make them apply to this process. And we have examples of this from Kenya, Ethiopia, Ghana, Liberia, and Uganda. The second one, drawing on the Constitution, is having a policy framework for ADR. Kenya's AGS policy is a case in point, because it helps you to establish the institutional arrangements that will enable this to work. The third one is privileging alternative dispute resolution for resolution of land disputes. Doing that in the Constitution, doing it in the land policy, that enables you to put in the law and then the regulations and the practice to be able to work. The fourth one is enacting enabling legislation. I think Ghana is the one that has the best example in this regard, because they have an ADR Act. That's an enabling legislation that then makes the process move forward. And finally, establishing special land courts within the judiciary to be able to evolve a jurisprudence. But my challenge to Oscar and my other colleagues in the judiciary in Kenya is let us have that jurisprudence truly integrate customary norms as well. Thank you.
And everybody say, exactly. I told you when Michael speaks. I'm not going to comment on anything, Michael. Now let me invite Barbara. Barbara Kiley is the country manager, IDA Law in Uganda, and an ardent ADR practitioner in her own right. Barbara, welcome.
Thank you, Esther, and thank you to all for being here today. It's a bit difficult to speak when you have such an eminent speaker before you, and he speaks to your points as well. So I may have less than 10 minutes, Esther, so we may catch up with the main plenary. But my invitation here was to discuss the critical steps that we can take to promote effective processes for ADR. And it's important for us to understand that when we're looking at effective processes, we are merely thinking of ways in which that we can build the confidence that the people who utilize these services will be able to accept the outcomes of the processes that they are involved in. And to be able to do this, it is important for us to look at various elements. And the first of this, of course, as has been mentioned by Michael, is the legal framework and the policy framework that is your operational context. To do this, you must be able to see, and this is what I think Kenya has done and Uganda is trying very hard to do, is to examine your need for the recognition and the outcome of these processes. What exactly do you want out of an ADR process? Why would you engage in an ADR process? Who are the people that you need to participate in this process for you to be able to come up with an effective legislative regime that will then be conducive for you to promote ADR mechanism? Now, just taking ourselves back and going back to the beginning, because to have an effect, or rather to have a successful future, you must always look to the past to learn your lessons. One of the key things that is important for us to be able to promote ADR, I think for us, is going back to where it all started. And by going back to where it all started, we will realize that for the African society especially, we had indigenous ways of resolving disputes that made the dispute resolution process acceptable, that made the dispute resolution process effective. And that is why everyone would run to them. Of course, it had its own challenges, as had been mentioned by Gimara, that some of the processes that were adopted made, especially if you're looking for gender responsive adjudication of disputes, it failed. But then if you were to go back to that particular scenario, that particular situation, do not apply the mind that you use now, where you're more or rather aware of how the systems need to be, because at that particular point, that system was deemed to be effective enough in that context. So if we go back and we realize that for that particular context, the systems worked, what is it that has changed that then we need to look at now for us to be able to be effective in the dispute resolution mechanisms that we adopt? The first one, of course, is by realizing that if we put land dispute resolution strictly in just mediation, and this is something I'm hoping, Maria, you can look at in the toolkit, is that for the resolution of land dispute, one of the key elements of mediation is confidentiality. But when it comes to land disputes, there must be a way that we can manage the confidentiality, because it is not simply an issue of the disputing parties alone. If it is a dispute that has come up from a community land perspective, it's a dispute that involves the whole community. So how will you implement, or how will you enforce confidentiality of the process when it is a community-based dispute, because it's a dispute that actually requires the entire community to participate when you're resolving that particular case? One of the best examples I have seen is looking at the National Land Commission mediation process. If you look at how they try to resolve the disputes through mediation, it's by inviting the key stakeholders, so understanding who needs to be at the table to resolve that particular dispute. It's not just the landowner and the person insisting that they need to be on that land or claiming that they have rights on that land. It is also other key stakeholders who have a right to provide input in the dispute resolution process. So to be able to ensure that we can promote effectively the dispute resolution mechanisms is by understanding who needs to be at the table, who else will be affected by the decision that will be made post the mediation process, and ensuring that they have a buy-in in that particular process. So this changes, of course, how then we look at it, because it's a whole spectrum that we have to evaluate when we're thinking of effective processes. From the way the dispute begins and the legal process or the legislative framework that exists to enable the resolution of that particular dispute, to also looking at the outcome of this particular dispute resolution mechanism. How will that outcome be recognized? How will it be enforced? And I see that the toolkit has recommended a monitoring system. But then the question is, if it is a settlement agreement, because that is what you aim to get from a mediation process, when you take it to the court, will the settlement agreement be practical? And Michael spoke to this, a sustainable decision, practical enough for it to be implemented post the decision. Sometimes some of the settlement agreements that have been taken before the court annexed mediation process in the Kenyan courts are actually quite impractical. And you find that the registrar has to take it back to the mediator and the team to reconvene for them to have practicality. Because when the parties draft their settlement agreement, sometimes they may not be alive to the fact that they must be able to adopt a solution that can be adaptive as they move forward. Because sometimes you're very fixed in make sure that this particular person moves out, or this particular person is able to access this particular element, but then it doesn't speak to the longevity to be able to foresee any disputes that can come out of that particular process. And it is important to always be aware of how a dispute will affect, or rather the resolution of a dispute will affect the community at large, because land is not an issue that we can say is pretty individual. There's no individualism in land ownership, because land ownership can be overtaken by the state. And what will happen when you have a settlement agreement that the state then comes in and says, okay, well, now, thank you for undertaking the mediation process, but really this is not applicable. I mean, go back to when we had the land tribunals in Kenya, and the court came up just before the land courts began. There was this conflict of the decisions that are being made by the tribunal as being over and above the mandate that they have. Yet these were processes that were used by the community to resolve the dispute that they found at that particular moment in the manner that they deemed to be best for them. Of course, there were challenges in how those processes were managed, or how those processes came out with the outcomes. But sometimes I think in our rush to legislate, we remove the advantages of indigenous systems that exist and formalize them in a manner that then makes them more inaccessible and more impractical to especially resolve disputes that have more than just one party being part of. Of course, just to also look at the other element of the spectrum of mediation would be the capacity of the people undertaking the mediation process. Now, whereas we all assume that mediators must be trained for them to be effective and practical, we are all aware of the fact that mediations are continuing even as we speak, under the tree, by the roadside, wherever we are, someone is proceeding with the mediation process. And it is important that if you're thinking of mediation of land disputes, I think for us it is making it clear to all that for you to be deemed as a proper mediator, that all we need you to do and be critically aware of is that when you bring the parties to the table, it is not you deciding the dispute for them. It is the parties with the autonomy, or rather with the power to decide the dispute for themselves. Your role as a mediator is to guide the parties to be able to come up with a decision that is practical and sustainable in the near future. And I think for me, it is important that even the capacity development initiatives that we come up with are take note of that fact and are able to ensure that at the end of the day, the outcomes of mediation processes are not only sustainable, but are practical and also have a clear design on how they will be implemented in the future. And with those few, I will adapt the rest of the comments by Michael. Thank you very much, Esther.
Thank you, Barbara. Just to caveat at this point, we didn't share the toolkit because we wanted this to be as open as possible, but also to get all your views on what you think about mediation, right? It's intentional. Yes, very intentional. Different approach, because you'll start saying there's no comma here, there's no full stop. Huh? Yes. So I would like to open up to us, the participants in this room, to give your views. One person whispered to me and said, they've said exactly what I've been doing for 20 years and saying for 20 years. Now I'm opening up. Please.
I'm the culprit. I'm the one who was telling Esther. The first speakers, it's like they are summarizing what I've been doing for the last 20 years, and I'm so excited. First of all, as a lawyer, there is my learned friend practicing in Kenya. Secondly, My master's in conflict transformation, we insisted it cannot be conflict resolution. And then my first project with UN was UNOPS, dealing with the historical land injustice cases in Kosovo, where you have people who have been marginalized because of 3 systems of law, and that's what I was doing. And the first one was actually a UN. It first started as a UN Habitat project, and I was interviewed in our offices in Kigiri, in Nairobi, and then here is Justice Agote, who supports our commission in Nairobi. Actually, let me disclose this. He's not just the president of the land court in Kenya. He is the guru of the practice of the land law in Kenya. And I say this with a lot of pride because he helps to mentor my team. Our director is here, Brian, and he can attest to that because he is the one who pioneered the great work ESCC is doing in Kenya. Thank you so much, President of the Court. You're amazing. And then she's talking, and then she was talking about what the commission is doing. I chair the inquiry committee of the commission in Kenya. And we go throughout the country listening to people. I don't know whether you're aware of this. I won't repeat anything they have said because they have spoken what I would have loved to say. I'll just add a few elements from my experience working with the commission in Kenya and bring in more into the leakages. First, the first leakage. My learned friend from Uganda. What I spoke here in our session when we came was just what you said. When we are talking about sensitizing people or implementing ADR or the way we look at land, we have to start with ourselves, our mindsets. It starts there. And we have to start with our children. Because in Kenya, people always say, oh, land is so emotive. Oh, it is such trouble. We have to start teaching our children the essence of land. That land is a vehicle of wealth. That land doesn't have to be a source of conflict. And that is what Kauda did in Zambia. Children would be sent to different parts of the country to study from primary school, and they start speaking those languages. So ethnicity was no longer an issue. These are our brothers. In Kenya, land has been used to sensitize people to get votes during election, leading to clashes. So it all starts with our mindset. Then the mindset of the people who are actually the practitioners like us, whether it is in court or whether it is the land officers themselves. Okay, time. Now, let me go to the other leakage. The other leakage is the leakage of what we are doing in the Judiciary Committee that the president of ELC Court in Kenya has talked about. The only thing I will add is very short because of time. In addition to the leakage where the court refers the case to the state organs like us, and then we do a report. The reason why they do that is in the land sector is very technical. So you have to go to the ground. For us in the Legal Affairs Committee in Kenya and our directorate, we have a system we call Akikwa Ground. That is justice on the ground. So you need survey reports and you need a lot of interrogation of the planning systems. And this is what the courts are doing. They are sending this to us, and then we do this investigation, then we send the report to them. Then the other leakage, which I want to add to what Justice Agote talked about, is the leakage where we pioneered, and it was launched by our Chief Justice, you met her yesterday. We pioneered a model in Kajiado, which is we are going to cascade throughout Kenya with this assistance. And one of the leakage which I want to bring to your attention is that we have already received 50 of these cases which have been finalized by the AJ assistance, and then the commission is going to adopt them, and we keep the records and we make recommendations to appropriate authorities. Then the other leakage I want to make, the last one, Esther, don't worry about time, is this. The Constitution gives the Commission the mandate, just like the court, to encourage the use of AJS systems using the community initiatives, which are already existing. So it is not about customary law, it's about the prevailing customs. And then we have the Community Land Act, which defines what a community is. A community is not restricted to people who share the same ethnicity. It goes beyond that. And I don't want to expand, but it includes geographical setups where people are living together plus other factors. You can look it up, the Community Land Act of Kenya. The Community Land Act also gives different ways of resolving disputes, even in the systems which are in the community land. And different acts give these interfaces between the community rights and how land can be managed. So lastly, my time is up. Lastly, what I want to say is this. The commission in Kenya, and I can invite other commissions to look at this, and IGAD also to interrogate this, it is in a very pivotal kind of position to bring all this together in this way. We manage public land, which includes natural resources. So under Article 69 of the Constitution, we are supposed to balance community rights as we explore benefits to these communities, and at the same time, to look at how land can be sustainably managed and the resources managed and exploited in a sustainable way to protect the environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deputy Chair. For those who are wondering what AJS is, it's Alternative Justice Systems. Yeah? Let me start with Sylvia. That's you, right? Okay. Sylvia, you need a microphone because there are people online. So whoever wants to ask and you're far from a microphone, get to where a microphone is.
Thank you so much, our panelists and moderators, for taking us through a lot of insights concerning ADR. Mine is just to add and strengthen the reason why we should so much look into ADR as part of ensuring that we decongest the courts, but also look at the enablers of ADR. I would like to see a more discussion on investing hugely in ADR, apart from the legal reforms. We need the resources. The experiences of working with community in mediation indicate that they are very much willing to do this work, but oftentimes they are not resourced. For example, here in Uganda, the court annex mediators go all the time without resources, and oftentimes they don't operate as they should be. So the resourcing and investing funds into this process is key so that we can do a little bit more of skilling. We are talking about the international standards, human rights-based approach to mediation. This cannot be unless there is skilling and capacitating and facilitating so that people are able to have resources and even know the principles of a fair hearing and documentation. We need to make sure that this ADR is community-driven and owned. In other words, we should emphasize that it contributes to peace, security, and development, and therefore the outcomes should be looking at restoration and also harmony. So those are some of the areas that we need to look at as practitioners as we promote ADR. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Sylvia heads the network of legal aid service providers. That's why she's so passionate about that. Can I swing to this side of the room to balance? I'll come to you. Let me start from the back. Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Sulaiman Kafero, Monitoring Evaluation and Learning Manager, Muslim Center for Justice and Law. I would just like to applaud the previous speakers, and with no doubt, the ADR is the way to go But in addition, we need to weigh. In addition, ADR is a low-cost mechanism if compared to other ways of dispute resolution, and highly sustainable. So I feel that is a strength that we may need to add in terms of even research compared to other mechanisms. Then also beyond resolution of just land disputes, it is a mechanism that can highly resolve issues in the family justice systems. The only stumbling blocks are, I think, in Uganda, the legal and policy framework really curtails the system to go a long way in terms of dispute resolution. I will give an example. We have worked on the operationalization of Qadi court systems in the Muslim community so that disputes could be resolved within the family of Muslim communities easily. But the legal framework does not operationalize Article 129, Section D, subsection 1. So I think that has curtailed and frustrated the system in terms of dispute resolution. Yet you find many cases would be resolved within the shortest time possible and at a low cost within the mosque level and the within the cost that is quite low. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Allow me to move to this side of the room. I need to balance. Yes, please, sir.
Thank you very much, panelists and the judges. My name is Dr. Charles Mkalawa from National Land Use Planning Commission of Tanzania. I'm so excited for this opportunity and the coming toolkit because I see we can use it as a part of the solution because we are doing land use planning activities from national level, regional level, zonal level to the village level. And one of the key problems, which is serious, that we are facing wherever we are doing land use planning activities to the village level is land disputes and village boundary conflicts. I just believe first the toolkit will cover the approach that we can use on solving village land use conflicts, though it has not been mentioned by the judges and the speakers. And by the way, I just want to talk a little bit that for Tanzania, in issue of disputes, wherever we are doing land use planning, we have village council that we command that it should be established before the processing of land use planning for any village that you are doing land use planning. And this council, they need to be empowered. They need to be provided with capacity and facilities of working. We have about 12,319 villages throughout the country, and we cannot have enough funds to provide the capacity and the tools of working for these village councils. These councils is also make sure that gender is balanced, to make sure that women are empowered and the decisions and are not affected by being a different gender. So the gender issue during the establishment of this village council is very important. But these village council, they are just moderators. They cannot make influence decisions, any decision of disputes, and they are not involved in village boundary disputes. So I'm just looking forward to getting excited to see how practically we can use this tool. I think we are going to take it home. Rather than village council, we have ward land council that after, if the land dispute case is not solved in the village council, it is forwarded to the ward council, and then if it is not making it to the district land tribunal, and then to the High Court and the Court of Appeal. That we have the system set up that is just dealing with the land disputes in our country, Tanzania. So my take, I just want the committee to put so much focus and share with us that tool so that we can be able to apply it, because for the Tanzania land disputes and the land conflict is making 70% of the cases. Most of the cases that we are addressing whenever we are doing land use planning, it's our daily activities doing land use planning activities, but the case we are facing is land conflicts and disputes. So this tool is going to be very important tool for the conflict resolution throughout the country, Tanzania. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Where are women? Okay. Where? No, I'm moving to this side now, looking for women on this side. Yes, please, ma'am. Find a microphone.
So my name is Susan, and as I'm seated here, I'm thinking about the concept of alternative, because my question is, who defines it as alternative? What is the mainstream? Why do we as Africans want our mechanisms to be alternative when we want to take others that are not ours as the mainstream? And I'm asking that because as we are seated here, all of us, we have children at home. And I'm not very sure how many of your children live in the villages. I'm not even very sure which languages they speak. I'm sure majority of them either speak Kiswahili, English, or French. And therefore, law is expressed in terms of language. So which language do you want our children to discuss our traditional, what you call traditional, ways of resolving disputes when they cannot even speak in the language that you want that alternative to be? And I say that because the mechanisms of resolving conflict that we are talking about here this morning are not taught at the primary school level. And for me, therefore, there is need for a multi-sectoral engagement between the stakeholders. The education stakeholders should work together to ensure that at the primary school level, the languages that we use to teach those alternative dispute resolution mechanisms is the language that they can understand. Because I'm imagining the next 50 years, and we are telling our children that we want them to discuss those alternative dispute resolution mechanisms that we call traditional, and then we still expect to tell them that those are the best methods for us to use to resolve our conflicts. I think it's going to be to remain alternative as long as our languages are not expressing the legal discourse that we want them to engage in. Until we see what we call as alternative as the mainstream and the mainstream as the alternative, then we will engage in a lot of discussions in rooms and then leave it at that. Thank you.
I will give that bullet to Gimara, particularly. I'm moving back to this side of the room. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Awelo Sarah. I got excited when they started talking about communities resolving disputes. UCLF implements a project in Kayunga district, and we have so many land disputes that is a result. We have gender-based violence cases as a result of the land disputes in Kayunga, but we had decided to use the communities to resolve their cases themselves. We always go to the location the day when there will be no market day, and the communities are seated there, and they bring in their disputes, and everyone resolves in the local language. And if there is contract to be signed an agreement, it will be written in the local language. And we've discovered that when this is done, it is permanent. You're not going to get appeals. But when you go to court in a community, you will get appeals up to Supreme Court everywhere, and still they may not obey the court orders, but the community will always obey their own orders. So I believe ADR is the way to go, and we're looking forward to that tool. And then also, LAPSNet has trained opinionated leaders in the community who they are members of that community, they reside there, they speak the language, they have grown up there. So it makes it easier when they see their very own sitting there trying to resolve the matter. So thank you. ADR is the way to go.
Should it become a mantra? This side of the table, Ken.
Thank you. Mine are just two wishes. But before my wish is, I think listening to all the presentations and also speaking from not having the benefit of seeing the toolkit, one of the things that come to my mind is a reflection that there are usually too many tools or too many frameworks which are hardly applied. So my first wish is that the toolkit then recognizes that there are also other possibly national toolkits, and I know in Kenya there are quite a number, and that there is reference and linkages to this. And the second one is that it should also be able to link, we are also able to link this toolkit, because we are talking about dispute resolution and mediation as frameworks for addressing land challenges or land-related challenges, that these tools then recognizes the issues around land use planning, spatial planning, among others, so that we use them as mechanisms for which we can be able to address some of the challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. The left side of Director.
Thank you very much, moderator. And I want to say, for me today is a real learning experience, because I might say I'm not a legal mind, from a legal mind background, but we deal with ADR, or resolving land dispute. I'm a planner by profession, or land use planner, and we have been very instrumental in the National Land Commission in Kenya, assisting in terms of ADR, or looking at way to intervene on matters land conflict from planning point of view. Now, I want to say first of all that I subscribe to the conviction that the way to go on land dispute is ADR, TDR. However, I think as Africa, we are at a crossroad. That's what I've gathered today. Because we want to use our traditional system, to use what was applicable in those years. But we should also recognize that because of the colonial legacy, what we have now are dismantled system. With the colonialization and thereafter the independence, our systems, all African governance, did not try to reestablish some of these systems at all, in any way. And because of that time, a lapse of time, it is not really easy to think or to imagine that we can retrace back and get to those systems the way they were. And that's why I like what the judge said, that perhaps what we need to know now is about the living custom. Exactly what is applicable today. But here comes the issue, because from our setup and what we have been discussing all along, our land disputes really cannot be solved through the conventional court system that we have. That is proven already. We cannot do that. So where do we go? Because we aped the West. We took their systems, and now we are talking about our system being the alternative. So that's why I'm saying we are at a crossroad. And for me, I think the future might also, unless we work very hard, as somebody has said already here, the future is not very bright for us because we are talking about a new generation that cannot really recognize what we are talking about. They may not be able to say, fine, we can sit down and take traditional dispute system to resolve our dispute. They may not even have that language or even that time or going back to the villages to accept this thing to be applicable to them. But all is not lost, because I think maybe what we are saying now can be a stopgap measure. It can be used, like our vice chair said, it has been applied elsewhere where those disputes has been resolved. But we need to move quickly and see, we carry out enough research so that we come up with something that is a compromise. Because already we are modernized, and yet we are saying we want to borrow from our system, from our traditional system. So that's my commentary, and I think we need to lead a work on this very much. Thank you very much.
When this side of the room speaks, I give this side of the room to speak, just to balance. Isn't that fair? Now that a man has spoken, on this side it shall be a lady.
Thank you very much, moderator and facilitators. Just wanted to share an experience about mediation. Where I come from at UCLF, mediation is mandatory for every case that comes in. Uganda Christian Lawyers Fraternity. We are a legal service provider, a legal aid service provider found in Wandegear. For us, we found mediation to be very cost effective, looking at the fact that our resources are sometimes limited, but we have a challenge with private practitioners who still think mediation is a waste of time. It limits how much they can get from a case. They feel going to court straight to have the case litigated is more benefiting to them. And so I would like to go back and talk about the idea of mindset and training, because I believe they have decided to continue thinking that you cannot gain from a mediation case. So I hope that toolkit will be able to address the remuneration bit for the mediators, such that we stop getting that interruption from the people who still believe they can only get from litigation, or they can only gain financially from a case if it's litigated in court than if it is settled amicably. Thank you.
Thank you. Mubarak, your hand was up.
Yes, thank you, Esther. And I also join the precurrent participants who have commended the panel for an excellent delivery. I'd like to address my mind to the recommendations that were made by the panelists. One, to the effect of bringing on board ADR within the legal frameworks, but on the other side, also subjecting it to the test of repugnancy. My question is, in terms of looking at repugnancy, to what extent are those matters considered repugnant indigenous? And if not, how do we balance the repugnancy considerations in light of our own traditional norms and values that define our history in terms of land, land rights, and so on and so forth? I think I see a challenge there, and I would like to hear what you think about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mubarak. There's a gentleman here. He has gone. You are finished at the back, John Mwebe.
Thank you. My name is Mwebe Kadibal. I work around issues of development financing and corporate accountability to the Africa Development Bank. We see that under the independent recourse mechanism, mediation is one of the areas that are fronted to address the conflicts that are arising from the projects that you're financing. And a case in point, we have the Wadela irrigation scheme in Pakwach, where a complaint has been raised, and there's there was a proposed mediation, and the people said no to the mediation because of the glaring power imbalance. You're already having a problem with government. They've taken the land forcefully together with the company. And then you're saying, let's go for a mediation. And the people are saying, no, you already used force. And so why do I sit on the table with you? So my question is, how effective can mediation be in instances of such glaring power imbalance? And also, how is the toolkit addressing cases as those? Thank you.
Pamela. Chelimo, I've seen you, but let me first give Pamela.
Thank you very much, Esther, for great moderation, and the panel. I was very impressed by the Lordship, Justice Angote. The systems in Kenya are really impressive, as reflecting on all those agreements that we have supported. I'm with IIRR. I lead the Africa region team at IIRR. And in Uganda, we have worked with the Ministry of Lands and other partners, actually including UN Habitat. Good to see you, Michael, on these mediation systems, in especially for customary land tenure. And the agreements are so many, and I'm wondering, how would it look like if we took those agreements to the courts, you know, to sort of, I think what you do is more like ratification, you know, of these agreements to, you know, make them formal and recognized and enforceable, because that means they enter into the jurisprudence of, you know, the court system, and they can be used as precedent. I think that's a very huge gap we have here, and it's a best practice we need to look into. Secondly, listening to all the speakers, I'm not so sure if I missed it maybe, but I was wondering how much emphasis have we put on gender responsive ADR? We talk about ADR, but how gender responsive are these processes? I'll give you an example. Recently, there was a training that the team conducted, and then they sent pictures, and then I see all these men and I'm thinking, this is a mediation training for mediation committees. And then I ask the team, okay, so where are the women in these trainings? Didn't we invite them? Said yes, but you know, most of them, I think they targeted LC1 chairpersons. And in Uganda, I'm telling you, just do a poll, and you'll not get more than 10% of the entire country as women as LC1 chairpersons. LC1, there are very few. And so if you're already defining the mediation committee to be led by, you know, the local council 1 chairperson, you're already, you know, by implication, already saying, okay, you won't have actually chairperson of a mediation committee as a woman. And yet we know a lot of these land conflicts actually are around issues that women are facing, you know, succession issues, land, the issues around inheritance, land boundaries, where already they are disempowered, resource issues. So it's important to have that perspective as we even look into the formalization of these mediation committees, who comprises the mediation committees, that needs to be looked at. And so it means that we have to have a gender focus, you know, as we're even looking at that. So I'm hoping that this toolkit that we haven't seen yet is really gender responsive, and, you know, will ensure that the rights of all vulnerable people, including women, it's not only women, are adequately taken care of. And those very subtle things that can, you know, perpetuate an injustice, you know, inadvertently, actually, you know, we ensure that that doesn't happen. Thank you.
Next to you is our gender expert there. We'll give her and she'll respond whether it is gender responsive or not. But on this side, okay, all the guys are finished. You spoke, no? You did? You're the one at the back.
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, I was about to make a case to the judges in-house, but I think with this appointment, I will not make that application. My name's Masalu Hula. I work for Landesa Tanzania office as a land tenure specialist. And I'm a lawyer by profession. And I have just one comment and a question. My comment is on the presentation by the judge. I think there are a lot to learn. The developments that have been made by the court system in Kenya, other jurisdictions has to learn. And my opinion is, I look at it as, I think ADR should not be monopolized by one space. Having variety of spaces for ADR provides a room for having an amicable solution to different problems. And looking at the court embracing this system, to me, it's an achievement. There might be challenges, but I think it's important to discuss the challenges and see the way to address them. Of course, I was challenged by the comment by Mr. Michael. I think he can respond to me. What he was not, he didn't want to call it best practice. He said it's good practice. What does that good practice tell about court embracing ADR system in a way of trying to find solution to different problems, including issues of land and other problems which can be resolved by traditional systems. And I was impressed by the way the courts in Kenya also gives a room for parties to go back to the community and resolve, and then any settlement that happens at the community comes to the court for registration. And then, Mr. Michael, if you can help me find, what does the good practice say about court having annexed ADR?
That is so specific. I'm going to ask Grace to speak, and then Ori, and finish with Stella. Then I'll give the panelists each 5 minutes. I think most were interjections, not questions, but just your summation of that, because we have to go back to the plenary. So Grace, quickly, 2 minutes, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, then a summation, and we go back to plenary.
Thank you very much, our dear distinguished panelists and participants for the respective submissions. I'd like to share three experiences from Uganda. One is regarding the mandatory court annexed mediations. In Uganda, from 2014 to 2020, we implemented mandatory court annexed mediations, but we faced a lot of resistance from the advocates, which has already been shared, and we ended up having mediation backlog at the land division. So what could have gone wrong? From us who were implementing the ADR project under the Justice, Law and Order sector, we thought that the advocates may have not been trained enough on ADR, specifically mediations, and we did a bit of training. Then we also thought that the public had not embraced ADR mechanisms, and they were not aware about the enormous benefits of using ADR to resolve land disputes. So going forward, currently in Uganda, the court annexed mediations are optional. It's not mandatory. However, still, there is a great opportunity in resolving land disputes through mediation in the formal justice system. And I'm thinking that we need to really have the buy-in from the advocates who litigate these matters. And they need to understand that if we handled so many land cases so fast, there is a lot that we gain from them if there is a minimal remuneration tagged to the land disputes, because we'll be able to handle so many cases within the shortest time. So my thinking is that we need to maybe strategize on how court annexed mediations can best be handled. We need to train the advocates further. Then also we would need Uganda Law Society and Uganda Law Council maybe to tag some CLE points on training advocates on mediations. Thank you. Then the other issue that I wanted to share is regarding the piloting of registration of customary land by Ministry of Lands and Development Partners. During the piloting of this registration of customary land, there has been a lot of trainings on mediation at the grassroots level, and experience has shown that so many land disputes have been resolved at the grassroots before the land is registered, which is an indication to us is that the best way to go is to advocate for community mediations so that these land disputes do not end up in the formal justice system, because the decisions that are reached at the grassroots level by the traditional leaders, civic leaders, can be owned by the people at the grassroots, and they can be able to coexist and live at peace at the community level. The opportunity that we have as Uganda is that the Uganda Law Reform Commission has developed guidelines for the formal justice system, for the informal justice systems. I'm not certain if they have been approved yet, but I think carrying on from there, we are heading to harmonizing the informal and the formal justice systems. And then lastly, we need to strengthen the supervisory role of the local council courts by the chief magistrates. The local council courts implement they resolve most land cases mainly through mediations in most occasions. So if we trained them and have clear guidelines on supervisions and deliverables, I think they'll be able to perform better and resolve land disputes at the grassroots level before they get to the courts of judicature. And lastly, I would like to strengthen the point on engendering ADR mechanisms, both in the formal and informal justice systems. We realize that the informal justice systems are male-dominated, and in most of the decisions that they may end up reaching, some of them may have the male bias, that they will be fair to the men, knowing that customarily in our traditions, land passes through the hands of men. But if we trained our traditional leaders to know that they need to be gender sensitive, to also know that women land rights, so that when they are passing these decisions, they are mediating, they will be gender sensitive. Thank you. I submit.
Thank you. That reminds me of the CJ speech yesterday, CJ Kenya. Those who were there, those who were not there, you missed. Oriza.
I don't think I really need to talk now because Grace mentioned what I wanted to say. Once again, my name is Elliot and I'm from civil society. I really wanted to thank the moderators. That was amazing. Coming from a background where we think that lawyers are supposed to be using legal languages, but then we find that when you speak to the toolkit, which you have not read through, and of which I think the ADB is going to share with us, it seems it's very interesting when we're engaging with the policy makers as policy influencers. But I just really want to appreciate you, Gimara, when you talk about the issue of mindset. We have had a chance of going through the mindset change systems, and you have to agree with me in Uganda that we are going to face a very, very big problem where the majority of our children are now engaged on smartphones, but not on smart land systems. And we may face more conflicts because I don't think my son knows the amount of land I have. And going back to the community to find the boundaries will be a very big problem. So how do we ensure that if Uganda is changing the curriculum into learning Swahili, but be able to understand that land is a great factor of production, as we say, but talking about the ways that we have, how are we going to work into this in a way that education systems, the churches, when they are preaching, they may need to think about what is happening tomorrow. Lastly, as someone coming from background of gender responsive budgeting, and someone mentioned it, I think, do we have this in the toolkit? Where is this money in our budget? if you look at our budget today. What are we going to do tomorrow if we have almost 60% of our local councillors who have not really completed S5, or I mean level, senior 6 level, and we intend to bring them into our mediations, and they completely feel like it is about money. By the time you talk about land, you sign and I just put a stamp. I'm looking at this in a way that as we think through as East African community and Great Horn of Africa, we may need to think of alternatives, but alternatives that change the mindset of the mind that is already corrupted. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Stella, half a minute.
Thank you very much. Most of my issues have also been mentioned about the engendering of the whole process, but I just wanted to share an experience as LandNet Uganda. So what we've decided to do to ensure that there is a balance, male and female are involved in the mediation. We've ensured that we train the male and female champions. And in that, we have seen a shift. There are a lot of cases that are resolved, but jointly. So in a particular village, we ensure that we adopt a male and a female so that they work together for the resolution of these land cases. And we've really seen many cases being resolved, and they don't have to reach the courts of law. Thank you.
I'm getting back to the panelists. 2 minutes each, if possible. I know we are passionate people. Yes, Francis.
Thank you, Esther. I will just restate what I said earlier on, that when we are talking about ADR, what is now called ADR, we should be thinking more about recognizing it for what it is, the value that it brings, not what it has been baptized, you know, from the onset, that it requires, that it should be viewed from a historical perspective as something that is, you know, that must be subjected to repugnance, especially customary law, that must be subjected to a repugnance test. There is a very big problem with that thinking, that these dispute resolution mechanisms that we think must be recognized for what they are, they're thinking that they are backward, that we need to, you know, modernize them, recognize the modern system versus that. I have a very big problem with that thinking. And I think that is why I go back to my earlier point. Let's think about mindset change. Who really baptized these things backward? And how have we, after independence, continued to think that they are backward? And why is it that now the modern system is going back to what you call backward to get a solution? That's really the problem. And I think we need to walk out of here, change that there is nothing backward, you know, in those systems. They may have few challenges like the modern one, but there is nothing backward. There is a resilience that these systems have demonstrated. So we need to pick up from that resilience perspective and use them to resolve land disputes. Second and last point is on codification versus leaving it the way it is. For many years, I thought codification would change many things. But I've been persuaded by the work Nigeria has done that probably you need to codify for many reasons. And people have mentioned it. Generations are changing. People who are administering justice don't have access to that knowledge easily. So I am persuaded that we need to think about codification. Then lastly, on gender issues, I just have a small story to nail that point and leave it at that. There was a commission where we recommended 2 ladies to represent us on that commission. We did not even nominate a man. They wanted 2 representatives, we nominated ladies to go to that commission. The first thing they did was to block the appointment of a lady, into a very significant position, and opted to recommend a man. What is my point? Is that when we talk about gender responsiveness, from that personal experience, I learned that not every lady is a pro lady. Yeah? So when we talk about gender responsiveness, let's look at the doctrine. It doesn't have to be a woman. Are the people trained enough with capacity? Because now those two ladies we nominated, I don't think they can support women like I do. In fact, when I see them on women issues, I say, I think I can speak for women better. Because I'm a father of 3 daughters anyway, only daughters, and I'm proud of that. So you have to look at it from that. Let's speak gender issues from, a system that empowers. And I think I want us to begin looking at gender from that. I think it's Margaret Thatcher who said, because I put on a skirt, I am not an expert on women issues. So gender responsiveness must be looked at from the perspective of empowering mediators to be sensitive and integrate gender issues in dispute resolution. Thank you.
Well spoken. Michael, you're not clapping for.
Thank you very much. I'll just answer to very specific, some specific issues. Sylvia, I think one of the incentives for ADR is often articulated as decongesting the courts. And I have a problem with that. Decongesting the courts is a problem for my learned friend, the judge. It has nothing to do with me as a citizen. That's their problem. The reason we want ADR is to ensure that disputes are resolved and resolved fast. It's the interest of the parties, not of the legal system. Decongesting the court, talking about decongesting the court is like talking about, traffic jams. You don't solve traffic jams by improving the road system. Because you improve the road systems, more cars are bought. So decongesting the court should not be the primary motivation for ADR. The motivation should be what it does to parties who want to resolve their problems. This issue about alternative, I think Susan has a problem with alternative. I think it's because we seem, in my view, in this conversation, we seem to be confusing ADR with tradition. ADRs are conducted by multinational corporations in commercial cases. There's nothing traditional about ADR. What we are asking for here is that in our case, especially in land cases which are mostly owned through customary norms, we integrate traditional norms into the ADR process. So there's nothing alternative, there's nothing past. And for me, when I think about customary law, I think about customary law as a lawyer, not as an anthropologist. Customary law is not something in the past. It is something in the present. When you talk about codification, the penal code is codified. Is it not living? Why is it a problem to codify customary law when you can codify the penal code system and it still works? This is a mindset issue. Codification is part of ensuring that there's predictability in looking up the law and interpreting it. So there's nothing wrong with codifying customary law, and codification does not mean that it gets, amortified into some kind of museum piece. It's just making sure that we are all able to talk about it concretely and we're able to develop it. Even the constitutions, the Ugandan constitution is 1995. Today we are in 2022. Is there a problem with that? Not because of the period. There may be problems, not because of the codification. So I think we need to move away from that. And this mindset thing, we ourselves are bought in, we internalize these things so much that we don't realize, even though we complain, we're actually the ones that are empowering this problem. Exactly. And that goes to the issue you just mentioned about gender, because when we talk about gender, there's this assumption that unless it is all men, unless women are in it, it cannot be gender sensitive. Some of the most patriarchal people I know are women, and some of the most matriarchal people I know are men. It is not men or women, it's mindset. So we need to be alive to that. In terms of the toolkit and remuneration, someone mentioned that part of the problem with ADR is that lawyers feel that it's not paying enough. We need to be very careful. And I asked Maria to think about that in the toolkit. Because if you think about making ADR appealing to lawyers, then you're not solving the problem. We're running away from a problem. Lawyers are chasing us out of the court to make sure that it becomes the same thing that they have in the courts. How does that help us? Yeah. We have to sell this idea. If it is alternative to the courts, it must be alternative also in the manner in which it is implemented. And we should not be afraid to say that. Choices, people should make choices. And we should be able to make those choices without feeling guilty about it. I think John raised an issue which I also wanted to raise, and I'm happy that he raised it, this power imbalance. The toolkit talks about power imbalance, but it only recognizes. It doesn't say how will it be dealt with. And power imbalance is also linked to the gender issue. So we have to articulate in the toolkit, how do we ensure that it's possible to do mediation where there's a power asymmetry between the disputants? And I think the example that he gave about, land grabbing by powerful people is a case in point. And we need to find out how to do that. And finally, the formal-informal distinction. When you talk about formalization and informal, I'm very uncomfortable with that. The idea that we have something called informal justice system and formal justice, what does that mean? Why are the courts formal justice systems and anything happening outside the court informal? Formality is about having procedures and processes. Are we saying that once you take it out of the court, there's no procedure and there's no process? These are the distinctions that we make in order to mystify processes and justify our fee notes, but without any basis in reality. Thank you.
My cousin, you had on us today. Barbara.
I think I'll take the question on the supervision of the local council courts by the magistrates. This is somehow being done by the, what do you call them, the DCCs and the RCCs, the regional coordinators committees and the district coordinators committees, because this then the court, but it's a pilot, still in a pilot phase, how the court can then improve the interlinkage between the various justice actors. And of course, one of the stakeholders is the local council court. And we hope that because of that kind of a stakeholder engagement, because then you have the people who access the service, the people who provide the service, sitting together to evaluate their own processes, you'll be able to get good feedback that can be applied in improving the whole process. But when it comes to mediation, evaluation of the process can only be done by the users. If the users feel comfortable enough or aware enough of what they should be able to get from a mediation process, they should be enlightened. And I think this is a call to all the civil society organizations and the government as well, to make sure that the people accessing a particular service are aware of the tenets that are beholden to that particular service provision, so that they are then able to cut out or be able to give constructive criticism to the process to improve it further and ensure that it is the decisions that come out of it are also implementable. I'd just like to weigh in on the power balance question. For me, it is an issue of the mediator's skill. If the mediator is skilled enough and aware enough of the dispute before that particular mediator, before herself or the parties that are before her, she is then able to manage that power imbalance, because you can get the issues that are then before you by either going into caucus or by asking that the parties separate, or just managing the mediation process to be able to attend to that particular power imbalance. Because if you're not skilled enough, then you'll be bullied by the parties that are before you, which is why it is always very important when you're doing your selection of either the part of the mediator, that you ensure that this is someone who's grounded enough to understand that the roles that the different parties play. And even the lawyers, because now lawyers have insisted to be in mediation processes, they can really be a barrier when you're sitting down with the parties and you're trying to decide, you're trying to facilitate, and they're coming in, raising up the legal provisions of whatever issues are before them. And they forget that mediation, we don't focus a lot on the legal rights. We focus more on the interests of the parties. That is why we are before a mediation process. So I'll go back to capacity development. If your mediator is not skilled enough, if the parties are not aware of what their rights are before a mediation, then you would always end up with a process that is not suitable, or decisions or outcomes that are not suitable enough for you. There's a question about the court-annexed mediation. For me, court-annexed mediation is simply another means of ensuring that parties are referred back to dispute resolution mechanism outside of the court or within the court, but a different setup. So if you look at the Lagos multi-door process, they have a different model where you come in and you select which process you want to go for. If you go to Kenya, then they have the court annex mediation. You have to file, and then they send you back to mediation. Uganda had a very good, I think, and that's where the ADR task force actually copied the court annexed mediation program. And then now we are still looking at CADA and waiting to see more results. And I'm looking at my senior counsel here, Gemara. Anyway, that's a chat for another day. So court annexed mediations do not remove the autonomy of the parties once in the mediation process. It is simply a way to refer back. And this is what now, even for the AJS within Kenya, that's what they want to do. Have a mechanism for referring back the dispute to the appropriate channel or to the appropriate pathway that can be able to manage it and focus on not only the interests of the parties, but also ensuring that there is efficiency and effectiveness in dispute resolution by bringing the power back to the people to resolve their own disputes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara. Honorable Justice Angote.
Yeah, thank you very much. And once more, I'll be very brief. Now, I want to differ with my two colleagues, the advocates, and of course one or two presenters on this issue of alternative. The use of the word alternative. You know, I'm very practical because I deal with these cases, unlike maybe most of you who theorize these things. If you look at we are constitutional democracy. I mean, most of us come from constitutional democracy countries, so we have a constitution, and the judicial authority of most of our countries is donated. Barbara. Thank you. The judicial authority is donated to the courts by the people. The judicial authority, it's just the courts. Therefore, if that is the position, any other system is alternative. And you cannot substitute that. And why do I say so? It's because you can't have two centers of judicial authority. The Constitution itself does not allow it. And that's why I think my colleagues should be able to talk from that particular perspective. So there's nothing wrong with that term, alternative. And that term is actually a constitutional term. If you look at Article 59, it says that the courts and the tribunals will encourage alternative dispute resolutions. That's Article 159(2)(c). And one of those alternative dispute resolution mechanism is the use of traditional justice system. And why it will remain alternatives? Because at the end of the day, that decision must come back to the court, because it's on the court which has that authority that has been donated to it by the people. And if you do not agree with that position, the next question will be, how are you even going to enforce? Because the executive only recognizes one authority. So it can only enforce a decision that has been adopted by the court. So let's not theorize this issue of alternative dispute resolution unless we change our constitutional architecture. Then secondly, and very quickly, we have this. There's an issue which was raised on the question of what is this living customary law. And I will just read to you a very brief quotation by the Constitutional Court of South Africa, which quotation I entirely agree with. This is what the judges say, that customary law can change, and more so traditional leaders can change customary law to conform to the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Thus, the lesson gleaned from this case is that patriarchal leaders can promote the rights of women where customary laws do not favor them. And that is the summary of what a living customary law is, and I'll not say anymore. Thirdly, and probably that's the last issue that I want to address, is the issue of how do we deal with the gender responsiveness, or how have you dealt with it in Kenya? As I told you, in Kenya we have two systems. We have the AGS, the Alternative Justice System, which is different from the court annexed mediation. So that we have mediators who deal with our matters which come to court, we refer them back to them. That is a separate system where we train mediators, and of course we train both ladies and men. AGS, most of the AGS matters, they don't even come to court. So they start from the community level or from the church level, and they're overseen by a very autonomous body, which my sister here is a member. And by the time those decisions come to court, then those communities or those chiefs and the churches have already been told by the steering committee, these are the parameters that you need to deal with your disputes. And that's how we actually deal with the issue of mainstreaming, because they have been trained, or rather have been informed about being gender sensitive, about the Bill of Rights, about the laws that we have in terms of succession, etc. And therefore, as my colleague has said, it's not so much about having 50% or 70% of women in those committees, but it's the mindset and the training that that the people who are dealing with those disputes are actually supposed to adhere to. Then lastly, we have in Kenya what we call court users committees. Every court where the land court is has a court users committee where we draw participants from the county where the court is. And we meet on a quarterly basis so that they report back to us on what is working and what is not working. And we are able to retreat as a court and address the challenges that the communities are actually encountering. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who has been edified today? Who has learned something? We will continue the conversation in our different spaces, but for today, I think the purpose of the breakfast has been achieved, isn't it? We are so grateful. Maria, thank you so much for making this happen. Panelists, thank you for doing a good job, but I think we should be in the boxing ring next time, huh? Throwing punches on this topic. Allow me to close this session now. We're going back to the plenary room. We're a bit late, we've overshot, but I'm really grateful to each one of you for being part of this and for your contributions. The toolkit you will receive. Thank you and God bless. Kindly let's move back to the Victoria.